Okay, we left off on Daf Chaf Vav Amud Bet, if I'm not mistaken, and the bit that we were talking about was in the aftermath of the discussion of Tashmisheh Kedusha versus Tashmisheh Mitzvah. Let's just redefine what does that mean. Tashmisheh Mitzvah means objects that were used for a mitzvah, shofar, lulav, a talit. Objects of Kedusha, well, let's first start with what is Kedusha that you then have Tashmisheh Kedusha? The answer is, Tashmisheh Kedusha means not the Sefer Torah itself, not the 24 books of the Torah itself, not the Tefillin, not the Mezuzot itself, but something that is used for that, okay? It's there for... That would be an example of Tashmisheh Kedusha, okay? So, the Gemara says as follows. Amar Rava, and we're going to learn a bunch of different things that Rava is going to say in the vein of this mitzvah. Meresh Hava Amina, in the beginning, Hava Amina, I believed, Hai Kursaya, so the thing that they put the Torah on when they read from the Torah. So the bima, we call it the bima, but in the Gemara we're calling it kursaya. Okay, so this kursaya that you put the Torah on, I used to think, he said, or I thought it was tashmish did tashmish. So two steps removed. It was something which was used for kedusha, but not direct. It's a usage of a usage. Why? Because on every bima you have a rug or a carpet or a piece of material. You put the Torah on the material. The material is the thing which has the Sefer Torah lying on it. What's the bima? It's the thing under the Torah. That's tashmish did tashmish. So it's two steps removed from the holy object. So in the beginning, Rava says, I thought that the bima was tashmish did tashmish. Second degree tashmish. Vishari, therefore, it would be mutar to be able to use this bima. Let's say I want to use the bima and I want to play mahjong on it. No problem. You know why? Because it's not tashmish of kedusha. It's the tashmish of a tashmish of kedusha. Okay? Mm-hmm. Because the Torah is put on the rug is on the bima. Therefore, the bima should be allowed to use for anything else. But the rug would not be. The rug would be tashmish kedusha. Says the Gemara, but kivan de chazina de motveh alave Sefer Torah. Once I saw they put the Sefer Torah on the bima itself, without the rug. So sometimes the bima acts as the place where the Torah itself rests upon. Now I know, Amina. Now I hold tashmish kedushahu. The bima itself is tashmish kedusha ve'asur, and it's forbidden. I want to give you an example of our synagogue. Yeah. You know, in our synagogue upstairs we have the bima, and then there's the plexiglass, that acrylic plexiglass type of material on top of the bima. Where does the Torah go? On the plexiglass. What would the bima be? Tashmish kedusha or tashmish de tashmish? Double. Except that when Haron is not around, sometimes people forget to bring out that middle piece of the acrylic, because remember, downstairs it's always on the acrylic. Upstairs, it's two pieces. So it's like a little bit of a chet, okay? And then the middle piece gets taken off because the middle of the bima has an elevating part for the sefer, for the book of the Hazan. So when you put the Torah on it, what has to happen? You need to take that elevating part, put it down, then they put this piece of acrylic on top of it, then they put the Torah on top of that. Sometimes Haron's not there. What happens? It goes on the bima thing itself. Mm-hmm. So what would the bima be in our synagogue? Downstairs, the acrylic would be kedusha. The bima would not be because it doesn't move. Upstairs, since sometimes they forget to put the acrylic down and the Torah goes directly on the wood itself, that would make the bima tashmish kedusha. Now, if you notice, the upstairs bima has underneath the acrylic a piece of material.
Like a plastic.
No, like this.
Yeah.
Right? It's got that like a little material thing that hangs over the sides. So again, even if it doesn't have the acrylic, if it has that on and it never goes on the wood, the bima would still be tashmish de tashmish. But if that comes off, which it may sometimes do, if that comes off and use it for the Torah, then it becomes tashmish kedusha, and you cannot use it for anything other than something which is holy. The Amarava.
Rabbi,
yes.
How can we put the acrylic on the ground rather than on a chair?
It does not say that tashmish kedusha cannot be placed on the ground alongside a bench. It just says it needs to be in a safe place. And we explained already earlier because it can't be used for something which is derogatory or less than sacred, but it doesn't say that it's not allowed to touch the ground. Okay? Okay, let's carry on. Ve'amar Rava. Rava continues. Miresh hava amina, in the beginning I thought, Hai prisad tashmish de tashmishu. Now, this is interesting because all of us are familiar with two types of parochet. One type of parochet, you ever go to a synagogue and you see the parochet, that hanging velvet thing, where does it hang? Inside or outside the doors? In our synagogue, inside. Many synagogues, outside. You see it hanging outside. It's especially common by Ashkenaz shuls that the parochet hangs outside. But not exclusively. You find it by Sephardim, Sephardim, Ashkenaz. That is not what the Gemara is talking about over here. It's not talking about outside parochet. It's not really even talking about inside parochet. It's talking about a parochet that they had that would line the whole inside of the aron. Okay? So the Gemara said, the Rava said, I thought, Hai prisa tashmish de tashmishu. It's a double level, 2 times removed from the tashmish. Why? Because the aron itself protects the Sefer Torah. The curtain itself acts as a protection or a kavod for the aron. So therefore, it's like the honor of the Torah. So therefore, you'd be allowed to use that inner parochet. You would be allowed to use it for anything that you need. I want to share a reverse of this. Very interesting. So, very few people know that the Syrians, aside from coming directly from Syria to Israel or to America or to Mexico, there's another place that the Syrians went. Lebanon. That's Lebanon. That's earlier though. What? Panama is good. Also, Beirut is again. That's much earlier. Where did they go when they left Halab late in the game? Panama, Mexico, America, Israel. There's one other destination, and that was Manchester, England.
Oh, interesting.
People don't realize this, and one of the reasons is because at the time, Manchester was a very big part of the industrial kind of revolution.
Textiles.
Specifically in Shmatas, exactly. And therefore, people would go there. In fact, I spoke to an old Jew from Manchester who said that he remembers that in Halab, people would bless their kids sometimes that they should be able to be, so they should get to Manchester. Like that was going to be like the big, opportunity for them to leave Halab and to go to live in Manchester.
Like
anyway,
what year was this?
You're talking about 1900s. Oh. Yeah, 1900s, 1930s, 1950s, 1940s, 50s.
Okay.
Anyway, there's a guy there, very famous guy whose name is Dweck. Okay? And this Dweck was the son of a woman, a very famous woman. Her name was Habiba Farhi. Now the couple was very famous together. Her husband was called, I think Yaakov or Jack Dweck. He had a very interesting appellation. What was his name? He was called Avi Yitomim, the father of orphans. Because there were orphans, unfortunately, from pogroms and various things that were running around in Halab. And this guy, Jack Dweck, first he took them into his home, and eventually he built his home. He built them an orphanage for these young orphans to be able to live in. He was called the father of the orphans in Halab. Isn't that gorgeous? So he was married to this Habiba Farhi, and the Farhis back then, who were very, very wealthy. And in fact, if you go to Damascus, there's a palace called Bet Farhi, the El Mu'allam. Fascinating, right? Like a palace, very famous thing. You can ask anyone, you can look it up online, you'll find it. Anyway, why am I sharing all this with you? This guy shows me a picture of his grandmother, and he shows me that there's a parochet that was given to the Bet Knesset, and it has stitched on it that it was a gift from Habib Afbari. And he said to me, where did it come from? This parochet was given to them as a wedding gift to put on top of a bed, like as a cover on top of the bed, and it was so beautiful that she decided to give it to the Bet Knesset. That's fascinating. So you have this beautiful brocade, thing that was donated to the parochet. So we're talking about using something holy for something secular, not non-sacred.
No.
There was the other way around. There they took a bed sheet that was meant to be as a beautiful thing for their bed, and instead I'm assuming it was before it was ever used, and then they they gave it to the Bet Knesset and they used it for the Torah. Now here we're talking about a
wrapping paper. My wife found a nice wrapping paper she liked.
Yeah.
Let's say I think it was London. She said, "Oh, let's take this. Let's frame it." I was like, "This is $2. $200 to frame it."
to frame it.
She did.
Yeah, but it probably looks beautiful though, right? So beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? So the amazing thing is you took this thing, which is a simple thing, and you elevated it. And that's what we're talking about here. The whole of this Gemara is talking about how in holiness, we take things up levels. We don't down level something in holiness, okay? So the Gemara over here, when the Gemara is telling us that the parochet in the Aron, Rava says, I thought it was tashmish, the tashmish. It was there to service the ark, which is there to service the Torahs. So therefore, if later on you'd want to use it for something else, you'd be able to use it. Then he says, but then I saw kiva de chazina, de aifile, umanchi sifra alave, same thing like the bima. I noticed that sometimes they took the bottom of that curtain and they folded it under and they put the Torahs on the actual curtain itself. So now, it's not that the curtains are there for the ark, which is there for the Torah. The curtains themselves served as something that the Torah itself was laid upon. In which case, it would be asur to use for something else. The Gemara continues. Amar Rava. Rava says, "Hai tebuta the irpat." You had a teva, and the teva it broke down. Now you can't use it anymore because it's now broken, right? So it's not usable in its current state. Mi'abda teva zutrati. They wanted to make from it a small teva because remember, part of the wood had broken or rotted away. So they didn't have an option of making something the same size. So what did they do instead? They decided they're going to make a smaller ark with the wood that was still salvageable from the original teva. Now, Shari the Gemara says you're allowed to do it. Why? Because even though the original one was an ark, and this one is now a smaller ark, okay? But the idea and the Kedusha of the object is exactly the same. So it makes no difference, technically, if it's a big ark or a small ark, they both have the same level of Kedusha. So therefore you'd be allowed to take a big ark that was falling apart and refashion it and use it for something like that. In fact, there's something very beautiful about that. That you took something that was used as an ark, and instead of throwing it in the garbage, what did they do? They continued using it in its current state. I think that's something special about it. I always mention that I took my bar mitzvah money. My father took, like back in the day, my dad, like many fathers, would take the bar mitzvah money that you got, and they would use it to pay for your bar mitzvah. My father said, rightfully so, he said, all these people that are giving you gifts, they don't know you. They're giving you gifts because of me. They're giving you gifts because I have to make a bar mitzvah. So that's what I'm going to use. And he let me keep the bonds, which matured in 7 years. It took me, unfortunately, much longer to mature. But either way, so I had these bonds. How much did I have in bonds? I had roughly, I think it was around $2,200 or something like that. That was what I had in bonds. Okay? I left them for 7 years. You forget about them. You leave them there. When it matures finally at 20, what do? You just forget them. You leave them and they stay in bonds, right? Unless you have someone who's on it. I left those money and I was never able to spend the money because every time I needed some money for something, I would thought to myself, I'm going to spend my money I got from my bar mitzvah. I'm going to spend on this stupid thing, on that dumb thing, on a car lease. I can't even spend that on a car lease. I can't do that, right? It wasn't holy enough for me. So what did I do? I waited 23 years after my bar mitzvah, when I needed to buy another pair of tefillin, and I used my bar mitzvah money to buy my second pair of tefillin. Of like the very high level tefillin, very beautiful tefillin, like written in the best way. I got to choose the parashiot inside. The guy sent me back and forth. I don't like this one. Give me that one. The best kind of batim. I got the Lamborghini. For me, a Sienna is good enough as a car, but when my tefillin need to be Lamborghini. Okay, so I use my bar mitzvah money. I use something of kiddusha to be able to have something more of kiddusha. There's something special about that. So the Gemara says, you have this small teva, a big teva that falls apart. What do? You're able to make it into a smaller teva. Kursaya asur. But you're not allowed to turn it into a bima. How come you can't turn it into a bima? It's also for a holy purpose. The answer is because the teva has the Torah in it all the time. The kursaya, the bima, has the Torah in it for 3 minutes on Monday, 3 minutes on Thursday, and an hour on Shabbat. So it's a lower level of kiddusha because it interacts with the Torah on a lower level. I think that there's a beautiful lesson in this as well. Just like the kursaya is a lower level of kiddusha because it interacts with the Torah less, so too a person who interacts with the Torah, a couple minutes here, a couple minutes there, cannot begin to compare to someone who interacts with Torah every single day. The more you interact with Torah, the more kiddusha that there is. So the halakha is this aron that's falling apart. What do you do with it? You can make it into a smaller aron. You cannot make it into a bima because the bima is a lower level of kiddusha. Right.
Or you can't do anything with it. I mean, if you can't make it into a smaller bima, what do you do?
Oh, so we already said there's times when there's nothing to do with an object of tashmisha kedusha. So what you do is you have to put it in ginizah. So you put it in a safe place, and that's where it stays. So in other words, it's like filed away, yani. Okay. Now, sometimes what they do with this stuff is they actually bury it.
Yeah, got it.
Okay, but the point is, it's protected from being misused or used for something that's not appropriate or whatever the case might be. So we have to kind of look out for it that it never gets used in a wrong way. Okay, that could be, let's say, as an example, I'm a pack rat. I could put it in my attic, no problem. Leave it there. Forget about it. Why? Because nothing's happening to it there. What I can't do is I can't leave it in my front yard over here where any passerby could steal it. You have a dog take a whiz on the item. Has to be dealt with the appropriate care. Okay, says the Gemara. The Amarava.
If 90% of it is made into a smaller ark, what do you do with the leftover?
Excellent question. The Gemara does not ask that question. However, come on, somebody.
Doesn't it get filed away?
I want you to give me a proof for what Nathan said. I used 90%. Now this for a higher purpose. What about the last 10%? Can I throw that out now?
Oh.
How do you know that?
Because it had high kedusha.
Yeah, but where do you see that I used the aron for another aron?
Yeah, but it's
How do I know that the leftover also has that halakha? You remember
Lulav.
Nope. Nope. Do you remember the example we gave when you sell a shul? And the halakha was, if you sell a shul, everything has to go up in holiness. So the Gemara said, if you sell a shul, you could buy an ark. But we said, a shul costs much more than an ark. So the Gemara said, the leftover money is also not allowed to be used for something less. So you see that the Mishnah actually addressed your question when it asks about the leftovers, even after I've spent 90% of the money on a higher purpose. Could I now spend the last 10% of the money that's left over on something the same or lower? And the halakha over there is no. So therefore I would say, also over here the halakha is that it's not allowed. It would need tashmisheh kedusha, which needs ginizah. The Gemara says, Ve'amarava, hai prisa debala. Let's say you have a curtain, like we talked about already, inside the Aron Kodesh. And what do we say that is? That's called Tashmisheh Kiddusha. Rava thought it was 2 steps removed because it just services the ark, which services the Torah. That the Gemara answered, no, but sometimes they put the Torah, they fold the bottom of the curtain, and they put the Torah on it, so it's actually Tashmisheh Kiddusha. What happens? Hai Prisa Debala, it became worn out. Limiabde Prisa L'Sifrei Shari. You're allowed to make that curtain into the covering for the actual Sefer Torah. So remember I told you, when you have a teva that's falling apart, you're able to make a smaller teva out of it. Why? because some of it's rotted, some of it's broken, but there's enough to salvage to make a smaller ark. The same thing over here. The prisad that hangs inside the whole ark, right? The Aron Kodesh, if it's falling apart, so maybe edges are falling apart or threadbare, but there's going to be enough in it to be able to cut out a piece of material to just put on the Torah itself. It's much smaller. Okay? So that's how you could salvage it. So the Gemara says, L'me'abdeh, you're able to use it, prisad l'sefresh areh. You're allowed to use it as a cover for the Sefer Torah, for the Torah itself, not for the ark. Because that is a higher level of Kedusha. L'chumashim asur. But let's say I want to use it for a chumash. I want to cover a chumash. Now remember, their chumashim were not like ours. Right? They weren't books like this. Even though we discussed earlier, when we learned in Masechet Megillah, we learned that they used to write on papyrus, if you remember. So they had a form of paper already, and that was already present in ancient Egypt. So they could have had, but it wasn't something that was common that they were writing on that for books. Because the process of papyrus was a long process to be able to beat it out, like we talked about, and to lay it out and to have it dry, etc., etc. So anything that they were going to use, and especially if they were going to use it extensively, they used parchment for. So they would make chumashim, but only chumash bereshit. Now I don't know if you ever realize this. It's very interesting. Why is a chumash called a chumash? Because chomesh.
Five books of Moses.
Excellent. Chomesh is a fifth of the Torah. So if you have one book, what's it called? A chumash. What's funny to me is that sometimes you see people have all the books together, and what do we call it? Get me a chumash. Doesn't make sense. What's that book called? Chamisha Chumshe Torah. It's 5/5 of the Torah. But to call it a chumash is a borrowing a term which no longer really applies to it now that we put them back together into one book of all 5 books of the Torah. Okay? So let's say if you take a chumash, does not have the same sanctity as a Torah. So you took this tashmishei kedusha. Am I allowed to use it now to cover the chumash? Halacha is no. Why? Because that is considered to be a lower level of kedusha. Okay?
What about Kamshei Chamushim?
So Chamshei Chamushim would be a Sefer Torah.
So you're allowed to take the stone art scroll and cover it with this smaller piece of fabric?
No, because the stone art scroll does not have the kedusha of the writing of the parchment that you have when everything is written according to the halacha. Like no one says if a stone art scroll falls that you would have to fast. But if a Sefer Torah falls, so it depends. If you were negligent, you would have to fast. Okay? I'll never forget. I'll never forget when it happened, first of all, by us, but I also will never forget when I was in Prague, in Lublin, and the Ashkenaz Torahs, the way they put them up in the ark is they're sitting on these 2 spindles, these 2 like the wood handles, the etzim, the atzichaim. So they're sitting on the floor, and a lot of times it's just like propped up somewhere, and it could slide. They opened up the ark in Lublin, and as they opened up the ark, the Sefer Torah just went slid out, fell right on the floor. It was a disaster. Okay, so it's heartbreaking. So Chamisha Chumshe Torah is not the same as a Sefer Torah. So this inside curtain, since we said you sometimes put the Sefer Torahs on it, right? They would lay them down on the actual curtain. So therefore, it's Tashmisheh Kedusha of the highest Kedusha, which is a Sefer Torah. So you can't now go and use it for a Chumash, even if the Chumash was written on parchment, because it still doesn't have the Kedusha of a Sefer Torah. I want to take it one step further, okay? Let's say you have something like the Codex, the Aleppo Codex. Or, if you remember, when we went to Sotheby's, and we got to see the Sassoon Codex. How amazing was that, by the way? Isn't that amazing? So you have all 24 books written as one. It's all written on parchment, but it's bound like a giant tome. Would you be allowed to use the parochet thing for that? Also not. The same way, less than all the Torah invalidates it from being a Torah, more than all the Torah also invalidates it from being Torah. It's now a Tanakh. Okay? Now, again, that was not written as a scroll, it was written as a book. So other reasons why it wouldn't be the case. But even if you wrote all of Tanakh on one big giant scroll, it would not be a Torah.
Even if it includes the Torah.
Even if it includes a Torah. I'll share with you another example of this halakha. When you're stacking books, Jewish books, there's an order that the books are supposed to be stacked. Chumash on top of Siddur, Chumash on top of everything. Okay? However, the halakha actually is, if the Chumash has commentary in it,
Okay. Like
you can put anything on it.
Like Rashi?
Like Rashi.
Like the stone Chumashim?
Yeah, you can put anything on it. It doesn't have to go on top. Why? Because that which makes it a higher level of Kedusha is the fact that it's just the Torah. Now you added all these other things, so now it's a book. It's a book that also has the Torah in it. But it's not only the Torah.
Wow. So
Fascinating.
Siddur then.
Right? So sometimes you add, and what happens? You take away. Kol ha-mosif gorea, says the Al Chachamim.
Anything could go on this book.
Yes. Yeah. No. Any other holy book could go on this book. In other words, it doesn't, like, you could put this Gemara on top of a stone Chumash.
But not like the Hardy Boys.
No. You couldn't put the Hardy Boys on this either.
Yeah.
On any holy book. Okay.
Or the newspaper.
Or the newspaper. Anything that's not holy. Okay? So that the Gemara says, therefore it would need to be, you can't put it on the Chumashim. The last Gemara says, the Amar Rava teaches, Hani zvili de Chumashi. Let's say they used to have like a sack or imagine like a koracha, right? Like a talis zekel. They would have it for the Chumash. V'kamtare de sifre. Or the cases that you would have for a Sefer Torah. Okay? Tashmishei Kedusha. All of those things are called Tashmishei Kedusha. V'nignazin. And therefore, they have to be, you can't throw them out. You can't just, get rid of them. They need to be nignaz. And as we said, put in a safe place. Doesn't mean to bury them, but they need to be put in a safe place. Gemara asks, Pshita. Of course, the whole time you're telling me these laws, Tashmishei Kedusha, that's the law. Why would I think that this Tashmishei Kedusha would be different? The Gemara answers, Mahu the tema, I would think, listen carefully to this. Hai lav lechavod avidan. These are not made for the kavod of the Sefer, of the Chumash, right? Rather, liniture be'alma avidi. They are there to protect, not for kavod, but for protection. So I might have thought, and this is fascinating. Let's say you think about a bag for your tefillin, okay? So a bag for tefillin is tashmisheh kedusha. Everyone agrees, correct? Okay. Bag for tefillin. Why? Because the tefillin themselves are kedusha. A bag for a talit, not the same. But the bag for the tefillin is tashmisheh kedusha. Outside the bag, what do you have? The plastic. Is the plastic tashmisheh kedusha? What would you call the plastic? Tashmisheh the tashmisheh, right? What's interesting to me is that not only is it a question of tashmisheh the tashmisheh, the bag itself, why are you getting a beautiful bag for your tefillin? To show kavod for the tefillin, correct? What's the point of the plastic outside the bag? To protect it. It's not for the kavod. So the Gemara over here, for a minute, Rava says, you know what? You have to treat it like Tashmisheh Kedusha. Because you might have thought that the only thing which is Tashmisheh Kedusha is when the thing is designed for the honor of the kavod of the Torah. But when it's designed to protect the object, then it's just a case.
Right.
It's not Tashmisheh Kedusha. It's like a napkin. Okay? And in the end, Rava says, no, whether it's for honor or for protection, the halacha is that it maintains, it still has that element, what's it called? Kedusha.
I want to ask you a question. Let's say...
Wait, I want to just finish that, right? That's how
So
you
the
would read the
plastic-
Gemara. One second. That's how you would read the Gemara. Wait,
plastic-
hold on, let me just finish this. That's how you would normally read the Gemara. But actually, the commentators understand the Gemara a little bit differently. One more time. The Gemara says, Rava, why did you need to teach me that Tashmisheh Kedusha need to be nignaz? That's what we've been learning the whole time. What was the answer to this? The answer to this was, no, I would have thought that these objects are not made for honor, they're made to protect. And an object that's made to protect does not have the law of Tashmisheh Kedusha. Answers the Gemara, Kamash Malan. The truth is, now you see, that even that has the law of Tashmisheh Kedusha. There's some commentators that don't learn the Gemara like that. They learn the Gemara like this. Kamash Malan, what Rava was coming to tell you was that those bags that they put the Chumashim in, and those cases that they put the Torahs in, they were not for protection, they were for honor. However, what does that tell you? In a scenario,
What does that even mean?
I'll give you an example. Let's say as an example, you have a Sefer Torah case, silver beautiful.
Like what we have in synagogue?
Yeah. What would you say that is?
Tashmisheh.
Tashmisheh Kedusha. It's encasing the Torah itself,
Yeah.
and it's to honor the Torah. Now imagine, I didn't put it in something like that. I put it in a case that, like, the sofer ships it from Israel in. Like he puts it in a case made out of styrofoam. He puts it. Let's go further. He makes it out of styrofoam case, so it's covered in styrofoam. It's around the shape of a Torah cover, but that's not an honor for the Torah.
Yeah.
Yet, it's servicing the actual scroll. So what would you call that styrofoam cover? So the Gemara over here is saying, if it's just to protect it, then it's not Tashmisheh Kedusha. Tashmisheh Kedusha means, and let me explain why. Why? Tashmish means something that's being used by. Right? That's what it means. Like when you're Mishamesh Talmidei Chachamim, a person has a Chacham, a rabbi, anything they could do to help the rabbi, to be there for the rabbi, that's called Shimush Talmidei Chachamim. Okay, it's a big mitzvah to help a Talmid Chacham, to be there for him. You learn that way, you build a connection that way. That's a halacha. Okay? In fact, the Gemara says, Gadol Shimusho, better is the process of being there to help a Talmid Chacham, yoter milimudo, more even than learning from him. Because learning from him, everyone wants to learn from the words of a rabbi. But the people that actually care about that rabbi, they build a real personal connection, and the level of learning that they get from that person is in another stratosphere. Both in terms of the relationship, also in terms of the way he understands the questions you're asking him, etc., 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 etc. Okay? So we could ask, why would a styrofoam case not be considered Tashmish Kedusha? According to this understanding of the Gemara, you know what we're saying? The reason why a case is Tashmish Kedusha is, you know why? Because as I said earlier when we first started learning this, the Torah tells you, there's a mitzvah in the Torah, Se Eli ve'anvehu. This is my God, ve'anvehu, and I will glorify him. There's a mitzvah when you're doing a mitzvah, to do the mitzvah in a beautiful way. According to some opinions, there's an obligation. So as an example, let's say I have this etrog for $50, I have this etrog for $75, I have a mitzvah to buy the $75 etrog if it's a much nicer one. Until when do you go? Okay, you can always find something more expensive. The Gemara says, ad shlish, until a third of the value of the object itself.
Which means,
Sorry?
for instance,
So if I $50,
Like you're saying,
what's a third of 50?
15,
A little bit more, 17, let's say, right? So if it was $66,
that's the amount.
you would be obligated to buy the nicer one.
Ah,
Because it's like close enough. You ever have something where you're buying something for your wife or whatever, and and it's like an extra $3 is a nicer one. What does the guy tell you? What does your wife tell you? You're gonna, for $3, you're not gonna buy me the nicer one? If it's $500 more, she doesn't, she understands. But when something is a close enough range to the mitzvah, it's disrespectful not to upgrade for that amount. You understand?
Yes.
Yep.
So Tashmish Kedusha doesn't just mean that the holy object uses it, but rather that there's like a kind of an obligation. There's something in the Torah says to beautify the mitzvah. So a beautiful case is the kavod of the Torah. That's part of the Kedusha. That's why it's Tashmish Kedusha. You have this other thing, it's just styrofoam. I get that it's protecting the Torah, but there's no holiness to that. There's no connection between that thing and the Torah. Does that make sense now? It would turn out, what happens if a person has their tefillin not in a tefillin bag, but in the plastic bag, koracha? I've seen it. Sometimes a guy will take his tefillin, just stick it directly in the plastic.
No kavod.
That covering would not be Tashmisheh Kedusha. It would seem. Because it's not kavod.
does it protect the tefillin if the tefillin get fall or any? Does it give it any?
Yes, it protects it. But that's what we're saying here now. Protection is not enough. It's only when the thing, it gets the holiness of the other object because it's connected to the other object. And what makes it connected? When you're doing the mitzvah, where it beautifies it. Exactly. Okay? According to that opinion, there would be a big difference in halakha and how you understand Tashmishei Kedusha. Now, this is a fascinating story.
Do you need the plastic over your beautiful case?
No, you don't. In fact, many people don't use it. I always used to have, in our house, Chana and I, whenever we'd have a nice Shabbat tablecloth, on top of the tablecloth you'd have plastic. Why? Because it's a beautiful tablecloth. All of a sudden you spill coffee, now your tablecloth is dirty, and the Shabbat table is dirty.
Okay.
At a certain point in our marriage, Chana stopped putting plastic on top of the tablecloth. I said, why? She said, because you bought the tablecloth to be for kavod of Shabbat. The kavod is not to have it under plastic. You're eating now on a plastic tablecloth, it's not the same. You should be eating on the tablecloth. It gets dirty,
Right.
See, that's the example.
I love that.
You see that?
Yeah.
So it's true that it's unprotected. So there's some people that specifically won't put their tefillin in a plastic case because they feel like, what's the point here?
Right.
I'm going to protect the protection. I'm going to protect myself from the kavod itself. This is the beautiful object. Use it as it's supposed to be. Okay. So the Gemara is now going to bring a fascinating story. Says the Gemara as follows.
Can I just ask
Yeah,
a question?
sure. Yeah?
When you have a shul that you're renovating, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do the chairs, let's say that we're doing all new chairs, we're going to throw the other ones away. Do they have any significance? Does anything in the shul that, was present for all this, for everything, does that hold any significance?
So it's interesting. What we talked about is the bricks and the beams of the synagogue.
Okay.
The guy wanted to destroy this, take the synagogue down and build a new one with those beams. They told him no.
Okay.
So you could look at that and say, okay, that means that's different. Because that's the actual synagogue itself.
What is?
The beams
Okay.
and the bricks are the actual synagogue itself. I would not say that the chairs of the synagogue, because just like we said, if the curtain inside the parochet in the ark is tashmish,
Right.
the tashmish, what is this?
Yeah.
This is tashmish of your abel, like when you're sitting on it. Like,
Got it.
how far removed is that from the holiness?
Yes.
So again, if you told me that we're going to take these chairs and move them to a movie theater, I would think that that's disrespectful. But to use them as chairs in a random house, I don't know if it's a problem.
You're going to put them in the dumpster.
Even in the dumpster, I don't think it's a problem.
Okay.
Really?
Yeah. Because again, remember, when you're throwing something out, you're throwing it out. It's not inherently derogatory to throw something away. It's not.
Let's say I have to make.
You throw it in the garbage bag with the leftover chicken, that's derogatory.
Okay.
Like we said last time.
Yeah.
You use it for something which is inappropriate. If I move it now I move these chairs from the shul and I stick them in a club, that's inappropriate.
Mm-hmm.
You see? So to throw them out, okay, what am I going to do? I don't need them anymore. I was just actually involved in a synagogue in Brooklyn that was doing renovations, and another synagogue needed chairs, and they took all the chairs that they had in the synagogue that they were doing over. They were perfectly fine. They just wanted to redo it for design, and they gave them to a synagogue that didn't have the money, and they installed them happy as Larry. They had beautiful chairs, functional chairs, that they were able. That's amazing. So sometimes you just have to put in the effort to go find the usage in the appropriate. Now let's find this story is wild. Hahu Knishta, the Yehudai Romi. The Jews of Rome were living in the city of Mechuzah at the time, the city of Rava. Patich le'ahu idrona, machid bamet. Okay, so their Bet Knesset had, let's say as an example, there's the opening of the shul, and then imagine the shul goes like this, right? One part, that's the shul. The opening chamber is over here, and over here was a morgue.
Through the same entryway into the building.
So the same entry, right is a morgue, left is a Bet Knesset. Okay, what happens? Somebody dies. They brought the body into the actual outer sanctuary, into that room. The Kohanim at the time wanted to go into the synagogue to pray, but they can't go in because there's a dead body in this main room. You hear the problem?
Yes.
How are they going to get in? So the Gemara says something very interesting. Now, let's just be clear. When we say a Kohen is not allowed to get Tameh, one of the ways that a Kohen is not Tameh, I think your phone died and the recording ended. Maybe someone else want to... Yeah. No, because Nathan just messaged. Okay? So, what's halacha? Number one, the Kohen is obviously not allowed to touch a dead body. But what's the most classic case? That you're not allowed to be under the same roof, ohel. So if there's a dead body, bar minan, in a room, the Kohen can't be in that house. Okay? In Sha'arei Tzedek, whenever someone passes away in the hospital, there's a dead person alarm for the Kohanim. Did you know that?
No.
It says the Kohanim that there's someone who passed away in the hospital, they can't go into the hospital. Now what do they do then? If someone's dying all the time, and then where are they taking him?
Yeah.
The whole time they're under the same roof. Oh, so this is where it gets interesting. So the Gemara says as follows: they came to Rava and they told him, "What should we do? We want to pray. There's a dead body in the entrance." Amar lehu, he said, "Delu tevuta, take the ark of the Torah, otvua, stand it up in the doorway of the shul, between the shul and the entrance of the synagogue." Okay. Dehavele kli etz he'asui lenahat, because then that ark is going to be made out of wood, and it's a wooden vessel which is meant to be stationary. Let me explain why that's relevant. In the pasuk says that if you have this or this or this or this, all these things except tuma. And what does it say? Except tuma, it says o sak, or a sack. Says the Gemara, a sack is meant to be carried with or without things in it. It gets moved around. Okay, so the only types of things in that pasuk that receive tuma are things that are like a sack, that get carried, that move around. If you have a wooden receptacle, like an ark, or a big bookshelf, as an example, and it's heavy and it doesn't move around, then the halacha is that thing is not mekabel tuma. So he says, push the ark up against the doorway. If you're blocking the doorway completely with the ark, the halacha is not a problem. Why? I said to you earlier, you're not allowed to be on the same roof. But if in between this room and this room there's a doorway, and that doorway is sealed with something that is not mekabel tuma, okay, something that itself doesn't receive tuma, then this room is okay and that room is no good. It's like a door would work if the door was made out of wood and the door was asui lenahat. Okay?
What does that mean?
Asui lenahat means that this object it's not meant to move around. Okay, let's leave door for a minute. Okay, but technically, yes, you could use a door, and once it's closed off, so then it's like now the tuma doesn't come from there to here. Okay, because this is now its own room. That's one room with its roof, even though I'm under the same overarching roof, but the tuma does not get from here to here. It's chotzetz, unless that object is itself mikabel tuma, in which case it gets tameh, and then it can't stop the tuma from coming in here. Is that clear?
Yes.
So Rava tells them, take the actual ark with the Torah, move it, block the door, and then the Kohanim can come into the room and pray from some back entrance or through the window, whatever. But they could come in and they could pray, and it's not a problem that there's a dead body in the antechamber. On that, the Gemara says, the kli etze asur lenachat eno mekabel tumah, a vessel of wood that is designed to stay in one place, right? Doesn't accept it. It stops the tumah from coming into this room. Amru le Rabbanan, the rabbis told Rava, 1 second, no. V'hazimnin de metaltelele ki manach sefer Torah ilaveh. This ark, it obviously was not very high. Sometimes they would put the Torah on top of it to read from it. I'm guessing that they would have like a raised platform where they could move the ark up, and they could use this ark almost as a bima but also to read from on top of. Okay? So sometimes, it wasn't a constant thing, but there were some times where they would move the ark and they would put the Torah on top of it. If that's the case, that it moves, right? Then, just like it's like the sack that we mentioned in the Pasuk, it moves. And since it moves, and it's meant to move, it would not divide between the Tum'ah. And Rava said to them, Ihachi, if that's true, lo efshar, you're right, you can't block off the doorway with that ark, because it is an ark which is asui. It's not an ark which is asui lanahat. It gets moved around. Now, what we do see from here is that even an object that is normally stationary, but sometimes gets used in another capacity, so it gets moved, that's enough. I want to share with you why I'm thinking about this, because all of these cases are relevant immediately in our synagogue. How many times have you ever seen in the main sanctuary, you know the big bima where the Chazan prays from? Does it ever move?
Yeah. Well,
It moved for Simchat Torah.
It moved for Simchat Torah. You know when the time before that it moved was? Years. They move it when there's a wedding in the shul. You know how many weddings we have in a year in Safra? 1. Sometimes you'll have 2. Some years you'll have none. So the bima, you think about it, it's very heavy. It almost never moves. Still, it would be called a moving thing. Why? Because when you need to move it, you move it. Okay? And by the way, when we move it, do you empty it? You don't empty it.
you don't empty it.
No. If the only way to move that thing is to empty the stuff from inside it, then even if you move it, it's not movable. Because the sack, what do you use a sack for?
Carry stuff.
So you move it with stuff in it. No one carries a bag just for the sake of carrying an empty bag. So the dirasha of Osak tells you that if it moves, it has to move maleh v'rekam, empty and full. So you might have an ark, which if it's filled with the Sifrei Torah, you could never move. It's too heavy, it's too scary to move, things will fall apart or fall out. That would render it asur nahat, even if when you emptied it, you could move it empty. Okay? So therefore, that is the answer of this Gemara. We're going to continue Be'ezrat Hashem from here next time. Hanukkah Sameach. I want to tell you, I thought it was, even though I know it's Hanukkah, it's not so easy. I was hearing a shiur the other day, and the shiur said that on Hanukkah, what are we fighting for? They were hiding in the tents, and they were spinning the dreidels. Why? Because they weren't allowed to learn Torah. So what happens now? We go to Hanukkah parties and spin dreidels, and we eat donuts, and we do all these things, and we're not learning Torah. And all of those things were things that they were doing only in order to learn Torah. So there's so many different things they're doing for Hanukkah. So the idea that we're going to cancel Torah learning on Hanukkah is, to me, crazy. So Baruch Hashem, we were zocheh. If it's not going to happen. Now, I don't know what will be Sunday, and I don't know if the timings will work from Israel. So if I can, I will, and if I can't, I won't. But we should also, Be'ezrat Hashem, have next Thursday, which is going to be Vizot Chanukah. Yeah, it'll be last night of Chanukah. Okay? So
One more question.
Yes.
If you've sold the shul and you buy or build a new shul and you have money left over, can you take it to Jerusalem for Bedek Habayit or anything like that?
Anything which would be considered equal or a higher level of Kiddusha. So the leftover money has exactly the same rules as the money that was not left over, which was that it had to be used, by the way, machloket rishonim, either for same level or for higher level. It's a machloket. Why is it a machloket? Because if you tell me velo moridim, that we don't go down in Kiddusha, what does that tell you? That static is fine. But the expression is ma'alim bakodesh, you go up and you don't go down. So that would indicate if you're not growing, you're dying. It can't be that it's equal, it has to be higher. Okay? So the question would be if Bedek Habayit is higher. I would imagine that Bedek Habayit of the Bet HaMikdash is higher than the walls of a synagogue, which are only Mikdash Ma'at.
But that's Bedek Habayit when we had the temple. What about today?
Today there is no real bedek habayit.
I mean, they have pushkis in the wall, not in the kotel, but near the kotel for the maintenance of the, I guess, of the plaza, not of the Har
I would
Bayit.
say that the plaza has the halacha of the biggest Bet Knesset in the world.
What?
The plaza of the Kotel, where everybody prays. It's the biggest. You thought the hotel.
Yeah, I know.
It's the biggest Bet Knesset it's the biggest Bet Knesset in the world. Right? So Bedek Habayit over there would be no problem because you're fixing up a synagogue that is at least as holy, if not more so, than the synagogue that you sold. So that would be okay. All right? Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen.